Welcome, everybody, to Astro Detectives, where normally we put astrology to the test, where astrologers try to pick between two birth charts and decide which one of them belongs to our guest. But this week is a little bit different because our guest is someone very special with a lot more to say about astrology and astrology testing. Sarah, are you excited for our first installment of, I don't even know what we call this, the eyewitness accounts, interrogation, the extra investigating on the side?
Yeah, I love that. I am so excited today, Scott. We have a wonderful guest that I'm a huge fan of, and I think it's good that we're trying something different. We're trying to I think like in addition to like our testing, I think it'd be good for us to go around and like interview some other people who have a lot of experience with testing astrology in different ways.
I agree. And I was reading about Judith Hill, who we're going to have on, and her interest in testing is something that not every astrologer wants to talk about. Testing astrology, you know, to some people it's like, look, this is a thing. I don't care how it can be proven because I've decided it's real. But I love when astrologers like yourself, Sarah, are interested in finding ways that astrology can prove itself, as we have done for 40 some odd cases in our catalog. So today, though, you got like the week off. Today we get to have a fun conversation with an astrologer about astrology testing.
Yeah. I'm so excited to talk to her, and it's such an honor that she is here with us today.
So we're going to get into a lot of different things that she's done. There was an NCGR Skeptics Challenge. We'll get into her thoughts on our show and the format, just, how that is as a designed test. She's done work on things like the Redheads project, and you mentioned, Sarah, astro-seismology. So all of these things will be topics that we'll get into over the course of the interview. But until then, we'll get right to it, right?
Yeah.
All right, right after this break. Hey, listeners, we're not just a podcast that tests astrology. We're an independent detective agency. That means we rely on you to help us keep the show running.
Exactly. By joining Astro Detectives on Patreon, you can support our mission to finally prove astrology is real.
Or, completely debunk it.
Here we go again.
One thing we can agree on, Astro Detectives is the only place you'll find astrologers and skeptics working together, like a buddy cop movie you didn't know you needed.
And trust me, detective work takes time, gathering evidence, late-night stakeouts, solving cases, especially when Mercury's retrograde.
Okay, you can't blame Mercury.
The first step is easy and free. Just follow Astro Detectives on Patreon to get access to our debrief episodes where the conversation continues after each case ends. We break down what went right and what went wrong.
And if you want to fast-track your training, become a rookie detective for only $3 a month. You'll unlock exclusive bonus episodes, plus early releases and the top-secret case files sent straight to your inbox.
Or for just $1 a month, we'll make you an Astro intern. No compensation per se, but hey, you'll gain valuable detective experience and that warm, fuzzy feeling knowing you're helping us keep the lights on.
So if you like what we're doing and want to support us, head over to patreon.com/astrodetectives and join the investigation today. Welcome back, everybody. We're here with our guest. Now, Sarah, I know you put a lot of thought into this. Can you tell us a little bit about Judith, who we're welcoming to Astro Detectives?
Yes, our guest today is one of the longest practicing full-time astrological consultants in the world. She's an award-winning author of 14 books, founder of the Academy of Astrological Medicine. She spent years working in scientific research of astrology and has published significant statistical research on astrogenetics and astroseismology. So it's our great honor today to welcome Judith Hill to Astro Detectives.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Scott. That was lovely.
Yeah.
We're so happy to have you here. And like I was telling Sarah, you are such a great guest for this show specifically because testing astrology has been, something that you've been interested in. It's something that both of us have been doing for, a year and a half now. Can you tell me a little bit about what made you interested in the testing of astrology, not just the practice of astrology?
Well, like you, Scott, I'm actually a bit of a skeptic. And I wanted to prove for myself that astrology worked because it was my career. And I also was just very, very interested in if astrology could be proven in any way. So I started to design various tests that were quite unique at the time. People were doing very different kinds of tests where the astrologers were almost guaranteed to fail. And so I figured out what the trick was that was that was in these tests, and how to craft and design projects that would give statistical significance or accurate results. Because, if astrology could work, if it works, we should be able to prove it.
And designing tests can be so difficult because you don't want to tip somebody either way. Like, you don't necessarily want to be trying to trick the astrologer. And then, of course, from the skeptic standpoint, you don't want to even inadvertently give them more information that would lead them in the right direction that is not based on, the information from astrology. So you have to be very careful. And Sarah, we run into this all the time of, guess, don't say your birthday, don't say how old you are, don't say where, so I'm curious how you've encountered some of that, it sounds like.
Oh, yes. I've had to do a lot of thinking about how to make skeptic-proof tests so that skeptics can be rightfully skeptical. I respect anybody with a skeptical mind. And you have to design a test so that you think of what could they come up with to say you were cheating, or that this could have been discovered in the back room. Someone's checking up on the charts in the back room, and for the astrologers, there's an equal concern of, how a test should be done, especially if the results are going to represent the entire field.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah, how do you feel having she sometimes feels like the entire field is on her shoulders when she's on the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I feel very nervous about at times, because I really have only been studying astrology for 3.5 years. So I definitely had a lot of imposter syndrome in the beginning, like, who the hell am I to be doing this? But, I'm passionate about it and it's there, and no one else is doing this thing with Scott. So I just felt like, hey, let's do it and let's see what happens. And I honestly feel like it at the very least, it has been one of the most foundational things in my education. Anytime I've gotten something wrong, it's just made me a better astrologer, and I can survive the embarrassment.
You're a tough cookie.
Yeah.
I was curious, Judith, if there are any reoccurring or common misunderstandings that you feel there are between astrologers and skeptics in the area of testing. I know Sarah a lot of times points out that, skeptics just want to talk about sun sign testing, or, are there any just misunderstandings where you think the two are talking past each other? I
actually haven't heard a debate between the two sides.
Or even just in designing testing, or, what's important.
Yeah. The thing where the astrologers get tripped up is being asked to judge tests that are 1 or 2 steps removed from the client. I'll give you an example. One of the biggest debacles in astrological testing history was any astrologers could apply. Anybody who said they were an astrologer could apply. That's another problem. But the astrologers, whoever they were tested, a large group. They were given, this was way back in the 70s, I believe, or 80s. They were given Myers-Briggs tests that had been completed, where people rated themselves, on a level of 1 to 10, how feminine they were, how masculine they were, how this they were, how that they were, with no definitions. Okay. So one person might think being feminine is slinking around in a leotard. Another person might think being feminine is cooking and with 10 children. No definitions. They rate themselves. The astrologers are given the tests and have to match these with charts. Of course, they failed. That's like asking someone to interpret French through English through Chinese. There was no way that that's accurate, but the astrologers didn't catch on to this and they all took the test. And then it was touted all over the news that astrology was a bunch of bunk because the astrologers couldn't pass this test. So the first thing you have to watch out is a 1-2 step removed test. That's number one. Number two, eligibility. A person who is qualified to, especially if you can't see a person, which I don't feel should be the case, astrologers see their clients. But if you are judging charts and hearing a voice, okay, it's the best you can do now, and you're doing very well. But if you're doing that, the astrologer who could be accurate is one who has a significant background in astrophysiognomy, so they know what the voices sound like, and vocation, so they know what to look for vocations. Like person says, I listened to half your last show. Person says, oh, I love things to do with smell and cooking, and they've got this big, rich, mellifluous voice, and I was in the sex industry, and I was listening to this, and it's obviously this one chart. Okay, so, and they have to have some medical astrology background, so they can ask questions about health. And, person's got 2 malefics in a sign, and that's the sign that has cancer. Okay, of that body organ, that makes sense. Real good background in natal and transit reading, and has had quite a bit of in-office experience with real people sitting next to them. And if you get such an individual, with maybe 10 or 20 years under their belt, they should be able to pass these tests at a much higher rate than somebody just saying, I'm an astrologer who's been in the field for a year, or has been an astrologer 20 years, but has never studied medical, vocational, or physiognomy. They won't be able to see these subtle things without a person, to talk to right in front of them. So there are ways to, like you wouldn't have people without pilot licenses being tested in airplanes. So if you want to really prove astrology, you get the very eligible, highly skilled astrologers to take these tests. They won't want to do it, because they're afraid of their careers. So, they might have an agreement. If you don't pass, we won't tell the public. We won't ruin your career. Yeah. Okay. And number 3 would be specificity. Like what I loved what Scott and you were doing, I really thought it was great, was you were asking some very good questions, many of them that would help the astrologer sort. That's good. But and you also did something else very good, which I highly recommend, is no sign appearing on the sun, moon, and ascendant can be on the other person's sun, moon, or ascendant. And I would kick it up a notch. Neither of them can have the similar planet in the first house or ascendant sign. Yeah. That's one thing the skeptics don't realize. It's easy for one chart to mimic another. Say one person might be in Aries, and the other one might have Mars rising.
Oh, we've had that a lot.
Yeah. So you get the charts as different as possible, and you can really kick that up a notch. Like we're going to have how I know it would work. This would be easy if astrology worked. You say get 2 female charts. One of them, you have them be triple. Maybe they have to be double fire, 1 air. Be born in the day and have a Mars in a fire sign and Mercury in a fire sign. They're going to be unmistakably fiery. Be nice if they did not have Venus or Jupiter in water, because that would up the opposite element. Against a person who's a female who's all earth and water, Mars in an earth or water sign, and does not have Mercury, because the mind can fool you, or Mars in a fire sign, just does not. And has to have Mars in an earth or water sign too. And the person should be able to hear their voices, should be able to see them, see their bodies, talk to them, ask any question they want. They can be born within 2 years of each other, so you can't tell how old they are. That should be really easy to sort.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like what you're describing, Judith, is like it would, I don't know if somewhere down the road or at some point it would be good to have an astrologer assisting maybe the skeptic to draw up a second chart and review it and make sure that there isn't those cases where you have like an Aries sun and Mars rising.
Yeah, I mean, your test is doing very well, and you're just asking me how to kick it up a notch. So that's what, I would do. And you could really, get charts that are extremely different, and that helps. So if it shouldn't bother skeptics at all, because if astrology doesn't work, the astrologer shouldn't be able to tell no matter how different the charts are. If one chart was red and one was green, the astrologer shouldn't be able to tell. But if astrology is accurate, this should be able to prove it. I wrote you up a whole bunch of ideas like this.
Mm-hmm. And we definitely want to get to those for sure. And go through each of them. But I was curious about you practiced, you took part in the Skeptics Challenge way back in 1986. Is that correct?
It was either 86 or 89.
Okay.
I got the newspaper article, it's on my website.
And as you're talking about sort of like what would make a test or, what would be a good format, what drew you to performing in that or to taking that test? And can you kind of just explain how it worked?
What drew me was just chutzpah. I mean, I didn't have a career to ruin at that time. Actually, I'd been in practice already, probably 10 or 15 years, but, I didn't have a big name or anything. And I just thought, okay, I'll take it. And 3 of us passed, by the way. I wasn't the only one. So it was a test given by, I think it was sponsored by Randy the Magician, a famous debunker. And the NCGR got hold of the test and asked for willing subjects. And a man named John Sorek had passed it previously. And then that was before the NCGR got the test. And so I said, okay, I'll try it. And myself and Heidi Lutz were able to match 5 biographies with 5 charts. But the skeptics cheated because 2 of the charts had the same career. And I believe 3 of the charts had 2 or 3 had the same career. And 2 of the charts, the exact same disease.
Yeah. Do you remember how many people participated in that? It said like a handful in the article.
Nobody would tell me. I tried to get that information.
Oh, okay.
And all I know is that both Heidi and I used standard. It was a transit test. Standard Western astrology. What we were provided are 5 charts and 5 date histories of the person had to have a baby, had to have a major surgery. We got their career and a few, like 2 other facts, just a few. And we had to do it by transits. And I had a lot of knowledge of medical astrology and of vocations. That made my job a lot easier. And then I just looked at the dates and, was able to match. It took me 4 hours. Heidi did it in 2. I don't know what happened to Heidi Lutz. She might be out there somewhere.
Contact the show, Heidi. We'd love to have you on.
How long did you how long were you given to do this test?
We could just do it at our homes in our leisure. Nobody was watching, but they asked. So I said 4 hours, and I think hers was 2. I think that's what it was. I might have taken 8 hours, and she might have taken 4. This was way long time ago.
That's interesting. Yeah. Do you know if they ever did it again or just this one time?
I wanted to be tested again, and it was Mary Downing was the big cheese over at the NCGR, the big NCGR, not the state ones, or the city ones, the national. And I remember I sent them twice letters saying, let's do it again and let's try some other tests. Here's some other test designs, and nobody would answer me. And then later, I contacted somebody else and said, hey, here's some test designs. Let's do it again. And nobody answered me. So these people are all deceased now. Yeah, a lot of them are. I know Mary Downing is. I mean, this was 30, 40 years ago. 40 years ago.
Doing the same tests be of interest?
No, because there's much better tests that we could do over and over and over again. They would just take They would take orchestrating so that they were skeptic proof. You have to make these tests skeptic proof. They would take work. They would take getting a few highly qualified astrologers. Again, with that test, anybody could apply. You could be an astrologer for 3 months and say, I'm going to take the test. And if I fail, it's going to be reported to the world and represent all astrologers. That's the only problem I have with that approach. Let's get people who are highly qualified. And they have to know, to match natal charts, you have to know these different genres.
So we were doing a little bit of the math on that test and just how improbable it is to take 5 natal charts and match them with the 5 people, or you mentioned like the paragraphs. I think it was like 0.8% or something likelihood of it. So if you ran the test 100 times, only once should it happen.
Oh, wow.
200 times, about 1.6 times it should happen. So that's rare. And so that's why, on the skeptical side, we think, oh, okay, like that is very improbable. So if you can deliver that test and astrologers and, if they have the right credentials, if they're consistently passing it anywhere close to like even 50% would be really impressive.
Yeah, my guess was that not very many people applied because people didn't want to ruin their careers. They didn't know what the NCGR was going to do with this. And they did not publish the names of the people who failed, but they never told us what they were going to do with who failed and who won. So we were risking our necks. So my guess is they may have had maybe 3 people applied and 2 of us won. Maybe 10 people did, but I doubt it was hundreds.
They didn't present you with a big check and say, congratulations, here's the prize.
No, they just made a little article in the paper, but I considered that my PhD.
There you go. I guess, so looking at that test, you kind of talked about improvements that you would like to make, mostly on qualifications of astrologers for sure, and I could see that being important. You had kind of outlined for us some other ideas, maybe based on vocation or medical astrology or in-person office consults. Any of those stand out as being especially interesting to you?
Well, they all do. I think, I spent 5 decades with people in the office studying them. So I have a experience that we don't get anymore. Everything's on Zoom. And so I would love to have, someone send in a triple fire person and send in a all water and earth person, as long as I can design what charts I want to compare and see if I can pick who's who. It happened all the time in the office. That's one I think would be very good if you're just doing natal. And I feel the astrologer should be able to have time. Now, having time cannot be done on a live show. That's a problem. So an astrologer confronted with a cold chart that they can't tune in with their own handwriting, and have 2 minutes to make a decision with the whole world staring at them is very daunting. It would be hard for me. But if I can have 2 hours to study a chart, put it in my own handwriting, decide all the questions I want to ask that person, or I think you're going to get a much bigger result.
Yeah, and we definitely get our charts ahead of time, thanks to Scott. He'll send them a few days in advance, and I'll sit with them for a while and try to, see what I can come up with. They even provide a couple of answers, like on a survey ahead of time. And and then so I meet with our other astrologer, our guest astrologer, each episode beforehand, just to see if we're on the same page or what we're thinking. And and so that helps a lot. I definitely agree. It would be too hard to do on the spot, so, but I will tell you, Judith, I saw you at NORWAC this year, and I took every single class you offered. I wrote down every note you said. And I am so inspired by the medical astrology aspect that you mentioned. And I took some of that back and incorporated it and used it in the show. And it's helped me at least once successfully solve one of these cases, because one of the guests, she in her chart had a fire Mars at the top of the chart with like a fire sun, and she was talking about having rashes and red skin, and I was like, oh my God, we just went over this. So it's so true. And it really inspired me to, okay, I have got to learn more about this medical astrology. So I do plan on taking those courses with you. And I am a Virgo, so I feel like it's part of my destiny to learn medical astrology.
Very good. Very good. I also wondered, I just don't know the answer to this, but would you have more success if you or your candidate, your person being tested, would be able to question both people, have two charts, two people? And that could be so interesting because, signs have different types of voices. Like the Taurus voice is very different from an Aries voice or Scorpio voice. And you learn these things. And also you can then start, ask a lot of questions. Sometimes career tips it off, sometimes a medical problem. It's fascinating. You must be having a lot of fun.
Oh, this is this. Honestly, credit to Scott, this was all his idea. And it has been the most fun thing. I look forward to it all the time. It sucks when I get it wrong, but I always take that as a lesson, and it's made me a more confident astrologer. And I get very fascinated with okay, now I understand this nuance here, it really teaches you a lot of that kind of stuff. And, but I agree with you. I have thought about that several times. It would sometimes when you've got an Aries sun and then you've got Mars rising in the other one, I'm I just wish we had the second person here. Of course it's just a random chart that we made, but I feel like it sometimes when you need a tiebreaker, it would be so much more helpful to have two people with the two charts.
Well, what I loved about your approach was that you were bringing in questions of all kinds. So I just stayed for half that show because I was so busy that night, but I was looking at what was being compared. And so, one person had breast cancer. There's Mars and Saturn in Cancer, the sign of the breast. Oh, well, that's interesting, but maybe the other one had it, so, and then, one of them she has this very mellifluous, rich Taurus sounding voice. And one of the charts was a Taurus, and Taurus is like things that have to do with cooking and smell. I didn't get to the other, but I noticed some of the questions were about career, some about relationship, some about health. So you could start looking at, and then one was in a type, had done kind of sexy work, where the other chart, one of the charts was all Virgo and Capricorn, and Capricorn moons in particular, you learn things after years of practice. Capricorn's moons wouldn't have gotten into that kind of work because they don't even like you to run up and hug them unless they have a warning.
That's great. And by the way, this is episode 35, which was I think Carrie with the earthy luminaries, I believe is what it was.
Yeah. And again, I didn't hear all the questions, and I didn't listen to the whole show enough to make my own decision. But I was watching how, it was by half the show, all the dice were being stacked in direction of one of the charts. Now that could have been thrown by the end of the show, which I didn't hear it all out. But, you have to get a lot of questions. Now, Scott was asking the questions. Was your subject, were they able to ask a question?
Oh, the astrologers definitely ask our questions. Sometimes at the end, or sometimes I interrupt and try, good cop, bad cop, try and interrogate them a little bit more.
Yeah, I love that. There was this, really getting into it. I always thought, what would I do if I had, for years I thought of give me two charts in one person, or give me two people in one chart, or, and let me ask all the questions I want. And would I be able to match them? And I think I've had so much in-office experience that, day after day after day, everybody would come in and fit their chart. And couples would come in, and it was a no-brainer. It was easy to see who was who if you know physical astrology. You just look at them. And, it's so there's these little things that skeptics don't often know, that astrology has 7 branches, that it has a medical branch, it has a physical appearance branch, it has transits, it has natal, has psychological. So they just think it's just astrology. So you guys do seem to know this. You're asking some very rich, deep questions. So I appreciated that.
I didn't know when I started. I'll tell you that. I've learned more about I've learned maybe just as much as Sarah along the way. I went from 0, though. Sarah started with a whole lot of knowledge in astrology. And so I'm just approaching like beginner status.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm doing very well.
Yeah. I Scott and I were in a bookstore once, and I got him to buy the dummies version of astrology. Is that, or the Idiot's Guide to Astrology? Is that what you have?
Yeah, I'm like, is it around here right now? It's in the other room.
Yeah. I mean, that was just to get him to get something, familiar with it. But, we were just talking about the 2 charts that with the guest Carrie who had breast cancer. And I thought it was so interesting that, you had even like identified, a Capricorn moon wouldn't do that. And you saw that. I think where I went wrong is like astrology, it has very, very many layers to it. And so with my kind of like beginner status, I was like, oh, she's got a Capricorn moon. The moon represents a body. It's in the fall in Capricorn, and it's opposite Saturn in Cancer. I was like, that could be breast cancer, right? But I had not taken your class yet,
Yeah. Oh, can we stop there for a minute? Either of them could have had breast cancer. One had the moon in Capricorn opposed Saturn, was it? And the other had Mars and Saturn in Cancer in the ascendant, was it?
Yeah.
Both of that could indicate breast cancer. But so the other questions, the voice tone, the answer to the other questions, the career that one of them had been in, were edging toward the Taurus chart. But I was only halfway through. Tauruses get a lot of breast cancer. But either of them could have had that disease, and I'm going, And Virgos are much more famous for health problems. And at first I'm going, oh, geez, what are we going to do? It could be either one. And then she starts talking about her careers, her relationships, and I'm halfway through, and I keep putting ticks over on this side of the scale.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, well, so now I've asked Scott, could we get Saturn in a different sign? Because I feel like that'll give me a lot more breathing room and differences between the 2 charts. Because usually Saturn changes signs about like 2.5 years. So then the nodes have changed, like Mars has changed. And so that's what we try to aim for now.
Well, Saturn won't show up in personality so much. Mercury really will. Mars always shows up, and Sun, Moon, Rising, and rising planet. Saturn, more how they structure their life or where their biggest problem may be. That could help you.
Right.
If they have no kids and they want kids and they've never been able to get kids, and there's Saturn in their 5th. There you go.
And I guess I was like, coming into this, I was like, oh, I've got a moon in Capricorn and a moon in Taurus. I was thinking, this moon in Taurus looks like it could be really well situated, but that's just like that's just the surface. You, like you said, you have to look deeper but that's interesting that you said that both could potentially have breast cancer.
Yeah, the moon, because the moon rules the breast, see, and so does the sign of Cancer. So one has 2 malefics in it in the ascendant, which is your body. And she's a Taurus where the moon is exalted. Was the moon in Taurus too?
Yeah.
That's a real tendency to collect toxins. Right there, you have a signature that if you're a medical astrologer, you would know. Oh, that's very prone to this, very prone. The other one, it could have been moon is breast, yes. Could have been any number of things. It could have meant something with the breast, but it wasn't definite. And the moon in Capricorn can get in trouble with other things. But as far as, if I was to take a bet who would actually have that disease, it was the Taurus chart. But again, I didn't hear the whole show, so I could be wrong. And
No, that was the one.
yeah, and I actually had pinned her by the time she's talking about her sexy career and her career with her business and her things to do with aromatherapy. Taurus has a lot to do with smell and the senses and cooking. And she had this totally Taurian voice. A Virgo with a Capricorn moon would never have that voice. Sounds like a singer. It's all this power, warmth and power in this area. You can hear it. You know, think of Cher. There's so many Tauruses that have that voice. So this is where a little bit of knowledge of medical astrology comes in.
Absolutely. And I'm definitely, and that episode was such a great learning experience for me. And now I know all that, and I can take that forward. So,
of course, the skeptic, hearing like, oh, well, a Cancer moon, or no, wait, Capricorn moon would never get into this specific career. My ears perk up and I'm like, that's a possible test. If you were to find people in a certain career and say, are people with this placement more or less likely to do this job? Obviously not 100% of the time or even, whatever. But you say, are they consistently more likely or less likely to be in this career? That's something that's testable.
Yeah, that's why I gave you an example test. I thought, okay, let's do a career test. Let's pick 2 careers that couldn't be more different. Pick a group of judges who have never, ever been psychic mediums, nor wanted to be, and pick a group of psychic mediums who have never been judges, police officers, managers, any positions of authority or power. One group enjoys, wants, and has total control over other people and their lives. The other one relinquishes all control. Its entities enter their body. It's very absorbative, open, completely receptive. You couldn't have more different types. Get like 5 charts of one, 5 charts of the other, and see if a vocational astrologer can match them, not just any astrologer. They have to have 5 or 10 years practicing, and not once a year, having a practice in medical astrology, like I did.
Is vocational astrology something that you teach in your academy?
Yes, we have a full class on it. It's the Academy for Astrological Medicine, but we do have a beautiful 2, I believe, slideshow classes on vocation. And I have a book. I have a book that won a American Federation of Astrologers Best Book Award. That's the one. And they print it. They own that book, the AFA. They own that book.
Well, I'm curious, you've been through the testing of, we mentioned the NCGR test, and then, you were listening to our episode and kind of our approach, which, gives you the opportunity to be much more, face-to-face, proactive, and being able to ask the questions as opposed to reading just a paragraph from this person, which can be tailored one way or the other. We have listeners who get to play at home. They get the 2 charts ahead of time. Can you kind of run us through maybe some advice and just maybe how you would approach it or what they should be looking for if they get, 2 birth charts ahead of time? They get a little questionnaire that has some, do you prefer this clothing style or that? And how to approach picking which one of these 2 birth charts might belong to this guest.
Are they going to be able to talk to the person or hear them?
They're able to hear it on the podcast, or we've just started putting it on YouTube, which I think is useful, as you were talking about having the appearance of someone can be important to guessing. So that's why we've, moved it to having that visual medium too.
Wow.
So, but they can't ask questions because they're, viewers, the interview has already happened. So, Sarah has a tough time, directing for team astrology, getting in some of the extra questions that I don't get to. But if they were just listening or watching from home, how do you think they could approach that?
Again, it depends if they can see the person or not. If I had 2 charts in front of me and one person, and I'm trying to figure out who they are, well, I'd first look at the chart and I'd say the chart had this chart has Saturn in the 5th house. I'd say, do you have any children? And well, I've none or I've one. If I could ask them anything I want, did you have any problems? Then I'd let the chart cue me in. I'd always ask them what is their career, what have been their careers. Say they have one chart is Jupiter in the ninth house in Pisces, and they're a Sagittarius, and the other one is a born in the house. That's the house of travel, and the other one has they're all about the home. I would say, have you traveled? Have you I'd find out if they were the world traveler or the homebody. I would let the charts inform me of the differences. That's why you want different charts. Or say one of them looked like they were incredibly athletic. Now, people will lie to you and they will fool you. I have a case. I still remember this young guy sent his daughter in. She did not want to be there for a natal reading. She was about 18. She sat there like this the whole reading long. And she had one of the most athletic charts I'd ever seen. And I kept saying, you really look like an Olympian. What is this? No, not me. No, I'm not athletic. And this goes on. And she kept denying everything. And then he comes to pick her up. And he comes in and he starts bragging that she just won like all-star soccer, the state.
Oh my gosh.
Because they're lying to me. People will. So, you have to make sure that that's the other end, Sarah. You have to make sure that these subjects are not plants. From the skeptical, the astrologers need to be skeptical. Is this person coming here to trick me? Have they been sent by skeptics? So that's why I'm thinking the pool you're getting these charts from, it's better that you get them from astrologers' files, from people who wanted to and believed in astrology, because you really don't know who's sending in there saying, I'm going to be on your test. There's plenty of people who would love to debunk astrology out there and will lie to you. I've had it happen a few times.
And I'd be curious of your thoughts on like what I'm trying to guide is on the other end of that. If there's people that know a lot about astrology, like suggesting that, astrology clients be the guests, it seems like the more that you know about your chart and your sign and the characteristics involved with that, if you're being interviewed about your personality, it's more likely, not even intentionally, that you will express yourself through the words of your signs and your birth chart. And therefore, not even trying to, I'm going to help prove astrology and, kind of the same, coming in with bad intentions, of not being, I think just accidentally, that just may be the way that you describe yourself. If you're a client and your astrologer tells you kind of like, hey, this is what's in your chart, these are the personality traits that you hold. Then if they give an interview, I think they would speak in those terms and be much easier to guess.
I think you're right. I think that you're right. They would do that. But if astrology did not work, which is what the skeptic point of view is, that shouldn't matter. The astrologer shouldn't be able to match their chart anyway. But I think you're right. I think the person who's a pro-astrology would skew their answers to their own self-image, like, oh, I'm an Aries or something, or I'm not an Aries, but, something like that. And they probably would. And so, but you'd need to do some thinking about where the charts are coming from, because you could have a skeptical plant in the audience. You could have wrong data. So wrong data, that was one I wrote in as a little answer for you. This is very, very important. Robert Karl Jansky, he's, I believe, deceased now, not sure. He was a medical astrologer who wrote a few books, who worked in obstetric wards. He said he never, ever, that always, 100% of the time, the birth times were written down 10 to 50 minutes late when the nurses were washing up. That means most charts that have an ascendant between 0 and 2 or 3 degrees may very likely have an ascendant in the previous sign. Why does that matter? Because any astrologer using whole sign houses bases everything on that, or equal houses. So I would avoid all charts that have ascendants in the first 2 degrees.
I totally agree with you, and that's something I watch for. And I'm suspicious we had a person like that on our show recently, but I definitely need to be very aware of that. One suggestion you had made to us is that, or I've heard you talk about, is that the astrologer should actually write out the chart by hand, and that's something you do. I was just wondering, like, if you could explain, like, why that is a really good thing to do.
Oh, that's a wonderful question, Sarah. My teacher, in the old days, we all did it. We didn't have computers, but my teacher taught me that to read a chart that you don't put in your own handwriting is like petting a cat with a glove on. You do, the minute you put it, all my students, they have to do this in their training. You put the chart, you can calculate it on a computer, but draw it up in your own handwriting. And while you're drawing it up, it's amazing. It's as if you're connecting with an antenna to that person. It's immediate, strong, psychic radio connection. Sometimes I feel feelings in my fingertips and images come into my mind.
Oh, interesting.
And it's quite amazing. I always do it to this day. I always draw the chart in my own handwriting. I usually make a nice copy for them. And then I usually at least study it for 1 hour or two before meeting with them. 4 to 6 hours if it's a medical assessment with a signed waiver working with their physician. So I don't just go around giving medical, readings. Very, very careful. So, but, I'll have a physician call me sometimes, mystery case, I can take hours. But for regular reading, always in my own handwriting. So I would want to be able to do that if I was being tested. And when I look at the screen, it's usually coming up in yet a new program that I'm not used to. And my mind has to go through this figuring things out. Where are things? And then I'm not connecting to it. It feels cold. And the only way you would know what I was talking about is to try it yourself. And I know people don't like to do this now. It's extra work. But believe me, people used to get jealous of me. They'd say, oh, why do you have so many clients? And I would stand up in front of audiences and I'd say, well, I'll tell you my business secret. It's very simple. And I don't mind sharing it because you're not going to do it.
That's so fascinating.
Just put the chart in your own handwriting. You're going to be a great reader.
I will definitely give that a try. I know I am such a tech person, so it's going to be, but I definitely will try it for sure. That's very interesting.
You will just try it 1 or 2 times and you will see that there's a difference, and give yourself, have you ever seen how old time photography works where they put the negatives in the chemicals and the paper? And
I've done it. Yeah.
You've done it. Well, It's like that. When you put it in your own handwriting, things start to come up slowly. And then you'll go off and have a snack, come back, and oh, wow, you see a new thing. And it's just all of a sudden you get an image of what careers are good. And it's just what they're doing almost always. It's amazing. It's just amazing how well it works. But yeah, it makes a closer connection.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
If you have to actually draw the placement, it's hard to ignore it because you had to physically draw it.
You're drawing their little universal template in symbols, and it connects to them. It's like a little radio receiver. And remember, all astrologers did this until about 20 years ago.
Oh, yes. I've heard tales from my family members who used to do this. Yeah. Yeah, well, we also wanted to ask you, so you've been doing astrological research for quite some time, like a lot of different studies, a lot of different things. And a couple of the projects you were involved in, we were reading about with the Redheads project and astro-seismology. Like, first of all, were these your ideas? How did you get involved with these?
These were my ideas. There are only a few people doing serious research, and I was one of them. And so the 1984 to 1985 through 1996 was the period I was doing. I did actually multiple large statistical studies and replications. during that time.
Wow. Yeah. So the Mars Redhead project I thought was very interesting. We were reading through some of the results, and it sounds like, you had this hypothesis that people with red hair are more likely to have Mars within 30 degrees of their ascendant. Is that correct? Am I?
Yes, what I was trying to do there was I wanted to get a test that the skeptics couldn't pull down based on psychological reasons. So people were doing these tests like, do you like Coca-Cola or not? These astrological tests. And the skeptics would just debunk it because it was based on psychology and someone else's interpretation. You can't make a psychological interpretation out of red hair or left-handedness, but red hair was a good choice because there was a tradition that red-headed people were ruled by Mars, just ruled by Mars. In fact, so much so that in ancient Syria, they would apparently sacrifice red-headed men to the god Mars.
Oh boy.
and then there were other real physical reasons for red hair we discovered, like Mars rules iron, and red hair is caused by a type of iron that isn't found in other hair. So I thought, well, this is a good thing to test. So I developed a hypothesis. I found a research partner who had one of the first computers, Jacqueline Thompson. She was probably 15 years older than me. She's probably in her 80s now. I think she's still alive. And so she had this computer, and we had to wear lead aprons at the time. It was computer radiation was considered a big deal.
Wow.
And, though we didn't, but people were. And so she and I began to do we set up redheads research. And we gathered 500 redheads in groups of 100 each in sealed envelopes. And then we had a notarized hypothesis, which we first did the first 100. And we notarized our hypothesis based on our results. Then we collected 4 other groups of 100. And their data had to be sent in to a PhD person who then he would open all the envelopes in front of us and we would all sign them. So nobody could debunk the data. And then the data was all inspected by the research director of the NCGR and so forth and so on. So you can ask me more questions if you want. Oh, and if people want the whole story is actually written up in here. The astro body types, the whole story of the Redheads Research Project. But there were several papers, and I made this book, but I only have 1 copy left. I have to reprint it, so don't contact me right now because I don't have any. It's a cardstock of all the Redheads research studies and replications we did around the world, but it's very interesting.
Let's get that baby in PDF form.
Yeah. If anybody wants one, contact me. I'll contact you and I get them reprinted.
I'll definitely probably order that from you. And so funny that you also have the body types book. I actually have that, and I didn't think to check in there because I was trying to research it, but I did find a good article on it online. But it sounds like the results of that, were pretty. Well, if you want to talk about what the results were, it sounds like they did validate something.
They certainly did. Our hypothesis that redheads was just one of many we could have picked, but that redheads would be born more of the time than by chance, with Mars within 30 degrees of the ascendant either side, and with Mars weak 30 degrees on either side of the descendant. Mm-hmm. And so our first, we did 5 different studies, 5 different sets of 100 each. All of them were statistically significant. Then somebody comes up with the John Addy redhead data from England from 20 years earlier, and he had 100 redheads he had gathered, not for this purpose. They showed even more statistical significance than ours did in the same direction of our hypothesis. That was amazing. So then what happened? The skeptics said, well, you have one group. You don't have 6 groups of 100. You have one group. Now you've got to start again and replicate it. That was kind of crazy. We'd already replicated it up the kazoo. So, but we started again, and we got a group of we got Ron Bippus was gathering in Canada, and Mike McNeil and Beverly Steffert had a group going in England. And we were doing bright red natural redheads versus strawberry blonde. We did not segregate by sex yet, but all the groups were statistically significant except the English group. But what was interesting is all groups showed the redhead curve. If you show, I could actually show it here. Let's see. Might be able to have it right here. Okay, this is normal. This little flat line shows a normal district. Can you see it? A normal distribution of just birth times. There's a natural birth distribution through the day that is called the nycthemeral curve, and you see it there a little bit. So all the redhead groups together showed a much more dramatic look. They look like that. As far as where they're strong and weak. So there's about a 1% divergence off the ascendant and descendant due to just natural rhythm. But even the English group, here was the more earlier groups. They're even our groups. They're much stronger. Okay. So even the English group, which then they lost interest because they didn't show absolute statistical significance. But what they did show, if you compared the difference between around the descendant zone and around the ascendant, that difference was still remarkable. But they didn't want to, they thought that showed the whole project didn't work, and they all lost interest because it didn't achieve the level of absolute statistical significance. But it almost did, and all the other groups did. So what we ended up finding was that the curve wave through birth times is very different, and replicatably so, over and over again in naturally redheaded populations. And of course, then we had to go into, well, why is that happening? And how is that happening? And that's a different story. But it was a very expensive and difficult project. And we got attacked many times by people saying all kinds of things, pretending they'd seen the data when they hadn't. And oh my goodness. But I'm very glad to be done with it. The astro-seismic project was a lot more fun, and it was amazing how working with Mars caused conflict. And I don't really want to work with Mars again. I'd much rather work with Venus or Jupiter.
That's fair. Well, you mentioned the astro-seismology, which is, I guess, predicting earthquakes.
Yes. Oh, God.
Yeah, and it sounds like you did actually predict one. Can you talk about that?
Yes. Well, a little background. 1984, 1985, I got a contact from Mark Pollitt, who's still my editor, wonderful friend. And he was working somewhere, and he wanted to do he wasn't an astrologer. He was interested in astronomy and geology. He wanted to prove we could predict earthquakes with astrology. So I designed a way to do it. We had a secret insider at the U.S. Geological Survey who would give us scrambled data, take our data and scramble it to compare with ours. And we did a complete world sample. We took all recorded earthquakes in history that were magnitude 8 and above within 200 miles of each other. My theory was you had to do earthquakes by region. Not the same aspects would cause all earthquakes. And we came up with nonstop statistical significance and the most remarkable visuals of astrology at work. Let me show you one. It'll just blow your mind. This happened all the time with the magnitude 8s in the same location. So this is the two great Peruvian earthquakes on record at that time. There might be one since that were magnitude they're great earthquakes, which I think is above magnitude 7.8. I'm not sure. They're both great earthquakes, very, very close to each other. And look at that. We found a series of planets varied in almost the exact same patterns. Now, our hypothesis allowed for this. We would find the same planets, certain planets would always be on the same crosses, astrological crosses to each other. Example, the cover is all the mid-level earthquakes in the Santa Rosa region. 4 of them are practically on the same day. So it was with Santa Rosa, it's Sun, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn and Mercury tended to be on the same crosses. Whereas for San Francisco, it's Saturn, Mars, and Venus on the same crosses. The regions would vary. So we did a big world study. Then we replicated it with an entire several studies of magnitude 6 and above in California, over and over and over and over again, all different regions. We also, I think, did a second world research group. Anyway, I have these. Please don't barrage me with desires for them. I'm so busy this month. They're cardstock. They have to be brought down to the mail office. If you're interested, write me, and I'm going to get this one into an ebook pretty soon. Okay, here's an example. The Mammoth Lakes, Bishop, California. We got 10 quakes, all on almost the exact same place, all magnitude 6 and above. And we found that Jupiter and Saturn were always in the same cross. See that?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This was amazing. But our hypothesis allowed it to be any of the Ptolemaic planets in the same cross above statistical significance. Now, if you just take a random group of dates or even people, this kind of what we're seeing doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. So this is some of the, there's another study that isn't ours, but this is one of the only studies that show visually planetary effects at work.
So does that apply to other regions as well? Like that those 2 planets are within, it looked like maybe about a 1/4 of the time or maybe a 1/3 of the time in these specific zones. So you could look at like Los Angeles earthquakes and those planets would be in those zones.
Yes. And Sarah had asked me about the prediction we made. So just a sec. So we found places and fault lines were like people. And so they each had their own signatures of earthquakes.
Interesting.
We didn't know how long those cycles would last. Maybe they burn themselves out and another cycle starts. We don't know. We can only go back as long as we have recorded earthquakes to exact dates, which wasn't very long. So we found that, yes, San Francisco, it was, 3 planets on these crosses. I think it was, San Francisco had a pattern. I think it was Saturn in mutable while Venus and Mars were in fixed, or it might have been Saturn, Mars, and Venus all in fixed. Whereas Santa Barbara, it's the sun in the sign Cancer.
Wow.
and we have Jupiter. We have different planets. You get the cross. There's 3 crosses, and there's the different planets. Each region's different. So.
Oh, okay. I guess that's what I was asking. There are different planets for each region.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Different patterns.
Yeah. So Mark and I, we did our very first time. We batted 100. Mark and I saw that a replication of what we saw as the Bay Area pattern was coming, and I lived in the Bay Area, and it was coming in a 6-month window. We outlined the exact fault line. We labeled the 6-month window, and we said it would be magnitude 7 or above. We sent it into the earthquake hotline. I also published it with, I believe, Del Horoscope, but it came out after the fact, but they noted that. And I moved out of town. I was so sure it was coming. And it hit. It was the Loma Linda quake. The exact fault line, it was above magnitude 7, and it happened within the 6-month window, based on this discovery we made.
And did any scientists or skeptics look at that and comment on it?
We have never had any skeptic attempt to debunk this. even Jeffrey Dean, when questioned about it, he was the great debunker. He pretended he'd never, and he didn't even include it in his famous book of debunked research studies of astrology. He claimed he didn't know about it. Well, yes, he did.
Wow. Well, so it sounds like there is evidence out there that people just aren't looking at, or.
Well, the best evidence actually came from Lily Kalisko, Rudolf Steiner. He suggested to chemist Frau Lily Kalisko. I think she was 1920s through the 1950s. He said the planets should influence cell salts, how metal salts move. So why don't you design a study? So she designed a study, and it has been photographed over and over again, because it works, where she would wait until the moon would conjoin a planet in the sky. And each planet has its own metal. Venus is copper, Mars is iron, Jupiter is tin, Sun is gold, Mercury's mercury, so forth. So moon is silver. So she would wait till the moon was conjunct Mars, say, and she would take Mars's metal, iron. She would dip the metal solution in filter paper. And within 10 minutes following the lunar conjunction of Mars, the iron would go crazy all over the filter paper. Whenever it would conjunct Venus within 10 minutes, the copper's with Venus, that's her metal, would go crazy over the filter paper, so forth. This could be photographed. So Nick Collerstrom comes along and he writes a book all about this with photographs called The Metal-Planet Relationship. I think it's out of print and hard to get. And he completely replicated this. There's all kinds of photographs. And he said, I talked to him, he said the BBC, they were going to show it, but they didn't. And he was able to replicate this effect. Well, if the planets can affect their traditional metal within 10 minutes of the moon's conjunction, so fast, we have these metals all through our bodies. There's a visible, photographable astrological effect. I found that even more remarkable than the visuals we found with the seismology, though they're pretty darn good. Now, these are not tests showing how these affect personality or careers or medical astrology, but they show planets affecting things physically on Earth. That's all they show.
And that would be the moon, or what? I'm sorry, was there another planet?
Just the moon. She would take the moon, and she would use the moon's conjunction of a planet and see if it would affect that planet's traditional metal. And it apparently always did.
Wow.
And this is a remarkable finding. So the metal-planet relationship, the name of that book by Nick Collerstrom, I consider the most important book ever written on the subject of planetary effects being proved to have some effect on Earth. There are many, many other studies. I did other studies besides these two. I just didn't publish them, but I did send them in to Jeffrey Dean. And I should have won that contest, and he had a contest, and he refused to let me win. He said he had some bizarre excuse, which didn't make any sense about logistics. I did a fascinating study to prove sun signs had validity. Would you like to hear about that, or?
Yes.
Yeah, because I'm always wanting to do sun sign testing, and then Sarah's very hesitant because, sun sign astrology, pop astrology has gotten a bad rap, but it's so much easier for the test to get people, because it's easier to find people with their sun sign than have to dig up their birth time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, let me show you how to do it so you'll win. They'll work.
Let's
hear it.
How the Gauquelins failed. The Gauquelins were great researchers and gave us some of our best career research, but they said the sun signs don't work. Why did they say that? Because they would do, all athletes, all musicians. Of course, they're not going to work. So I said, okay, I'm going to get this to work. So first thing I did is okay, let's take music. Let's take jazz music. Very different than classical. Let's break it up by instrument. Bass players, band leaders, saxophone players. I was getting 60%, 60% of all band players, band leaders were Leos, famous band leaders. 60% of on and on and on. Every single instrument was statistically significant. And they were perfect to their type. The only place Virgo excelled was as a bass player. They were number one. They're the background support instrument. And
Wow.
but then I thought, well, okay, if this is working, you get genre and then you get a second. Okay, let's do baseball and football. I could get a complete sample of all great baseball coaches, all great football coaches. And then I did it by, their position. Were they a linebacker? Were they the this? Were they the that? Every single position got statistical significance, both football and baseball, statistical significance for Aquarius for coaches, both of them. And also Aquarius came up for ministers, number one. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to go to Who's Who, or they had you try for complete samples. I was going to take every single nursing administrator, combine two fields, nursing plus administration. Take every single nursing administrator in Who's Who that year. I think I got 90 of them. 60% were Virgos. Now, what's interesting is the only two women in history who have won Nobel Prizes for working with the poor, Jane Addams and Mother Teresa, they're born 2 days apart in Virgo.
Wow.
So if you can, so Scott, pick a genre. Not just all musicians, not just all athletes. You want to go athletes, pick male gymnasts. And if you can even get it further than that, get as specific as you can, and you will probably see sun sign significance. And get a complete sample, where there aren't, I would just get a complete sample where you couldn't hardly find anybody else. You got the book.
Yeah, this is exactly something that I wanted to do. We had a previous guest on, Lane, and was talking about some of his favorite comedians. And we drew out all the sun signs of all of these comedians that he liked. And of course, from my standpoint, there's going to be more of something and less of something. Just as you get a scattering of data, there's going to be more of one sign and less of one sign. And unless we can get to a point where we can predict which ones would be the higher level or more likely to show up in comedians. I was trying to think of, okay, how could we replicate that with another group of comedians and then another group of comedians and see if these same patterns keep popping up.
Okay, well, if you got the same problem of doing all musicians, you'd have to get it to what type of comedians. There's scathing political satirists. Okay. There's rude, vulgar. There's people who are just really funny, So comedians are hard because each one's so unique. So, but when you deal with musical, like classical violinists, you're going to get, it's so specific. I would go for something, all comedians, you're going to get every one of them's in it for a different reason. You also tend to get two physically opposite types in comedians, I've noticed.
Well, then I wonder if the same type, if maybe three sun signs pop up more often, like if one scathingly political comedian shows up a lot and one for the other types of comedians. So if there's three or maybe four sun signs that are consistently coming out with just the label comedian, then that would also be statistically significant.
It might. It's funny because I gave a show today on astrological physiognomy, and I was pointing out how, Libras are often shown, so supposed to be so elegant and diplomatic. But if you get Sun and Mars in Libra, you get an argumentative person. And then I went and looked some up, and there's Simon Cowell, Lenny Bruce, the scathing. He was so scathing, ended up in jail as a comedian. And John Lennon, who was constantly mocking when he was, subtly mocking when he was interviewed by the press in his Yoko years. And there's probably many more. But yeah, there's definite, the more specific you get, the more you take a genre, a subgenre, and a subgenre, you're going to get significance.
That
And then-
is so fascinating. I want to look into the like this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I never failed. Every single musical instrument in jazz and every single position in baseball and football and the nursing administrators, every single one got statistical significance. And Jeffrey Dean wouldn't allow me to win the super prize. It was
Meaning
a
it
super
was-
prize for research.
and when you say statistical significance, like that one of the signs reaches a certain percentage?
Yeah, I actually had a statistician do a very simple test. This is 40 years ago. I don't remember it anymore, but it's a very simple test on, groups of 100 or groups of 60. And so it meant that the chances were less than 1 in 100. And you achieve statistical significance. We at least achieve the lowest level of that. At 1 in 100, you could have had that result.
Like when you were saying 60% were Leos of something, that would be very unlikely that 60%. It would be likely that, maybe one of them was, I guess I'm trying to break down, if there's 12 signs on average, it would be like 8%. So,
Yeah, I think people are slightly more often born in Leo or something like that. No, they're slightly more often born with a Leo rising. But you should have about 1 in 12
yeah.
with each sign. And
So on average, you would have an 8% of the people should be Leos, 8% of the people should be Capricorns or whatever. And then some deviation, because some would just, out of randomizing, somebody would be pushing 20 and somebody would be down close to 2 or 3. But if you're hitting 60, then yeah, that's interesting.
But Scott, not only were we hitting 60% on almost everything, but it was in the direction it should have been, like band leaders beating Leo and bass players being Virgo. And then all jazz musicians, we had statistical significance for guess who? Gemini and Aquarius, the 2 signs of improvisation, who are famous for quirky ways and liking things like jazz. In drummers, everything was fitting. And, Pisces as a sign seems to get very low statistical significance on anything because it's so unambitious. But it did achieve, we found one area, Pisces loves to be a jazz saxophone player.
Oh my gosh, that's so specific.
Yeah, and Pisces are so sexy and sleepy. It's perfect for them. So, the drummers, everything. So we always had these results in the direction of traditional sign character.
And I have to ask, did you try predicting ahead of time for any of them? Like, I'll bet that this or this sign are going to be the ones that apply to this career?
No, we did not. And would have been very good if we had. You're very astute. If we had pre-predicted, but we're just seeing what's going to happen if we do this. Again, this was completely my study. If I got a subgenre of a field like jazz or baseball, and then divided by the different types of instruments or the different positions in football, nothing wasn't statistically significant. That's why we're just doing sun signs. I thought, boy, what if we started doing moon signs, ascendant signs,
Wow. Well, I feel inspired, Scott. We gotta think of something here.
We're holding Sarah to it. She's gonna do a sun sign study with me now.
Yeah, I will do it. I love that.
It's easy. Yeah, just pick your field and make sure where the skeptics can debunk you is saying, well, you chose your data because there's these other 500 cases you didn't use. So like pick a field where you can get like most of the famous people in that field.
I see. Yeah. And Scott, you can pick them and we can look at them.
Yeah. I mean, the issue that we run into is if you run through all of the famous people and just observe what their sign is, then it's kind of hard to rerun it. So I'm thinking of like, how can I group people together? Like all of the jazz saxophonists from Michigan is one control group, and then all the jazz saxophonists from Wisconsin is another control group. And then you can look and see, do they have the same sun sign popping off the most?
That's interesting. That's another way of doing it. Yeah, we didn't do that. We just did. In those days there was just a book of, birthdays of great jazz musicians, and I had all their bios, and it was pretty much who was in the field. Jazz is a young field. That's why it was so good. I could get almost every famous person in it in history if they had a birthday.
I have a question. In all the statistical research that you've done, which seems like so much, did you ever get any skeptics or people from the scientific community to acknowledge or change any minds?
No.
Wow.
In fact, it was exhausting and expensive work. And at one point, I was getting so tired of the vitriol. We got a lot of vitriol and debunking attempts and all kinds of things. It was exhausting, and I just gave it up. I thought Arthur Young was a great physicist who was an astrologer, and he was a friend of mine. And he said, you can win a battle, but you're never going to win the war. It came to proving astrology works. Today, I don't believe that. The atmosphere has changed. Mm-hmm. And a lot more scientists are interested and open. And even as a career, it's no longer a disreputable career, which it was in my day. Mm-hmm. People don't realize the risk and courage it took to be an astrologer when it was illegal when I was coming up.
Yeah, I had heard that before. And was it literally like practicing astrology is illegal in the state, or that was in? Wow.
Was there
practicing illegally.
A national ban, or what kind of, when we say illegal, what kind of a ban is in place?
Every state was different. I can only speak to the state I was in, and it was illegal until it was either somewhere between 1986 and 1989. It was legalized. And right before it was legalized, some old ladies were being dragged off to prison, I think 2 of them in my city, and with all their books. It was, I think, the vagrancy laws. But we all practiced quietly, and it was considered, you were either considered a nutcase or a fraud or crazy if you were an astrologer. Mm. And people would kind of slink off to you secretly. You were always conflated with entertainers. Down at the library with the 2 giant vocational books, they would list astrologer under entertainer. And it was considered kind of something charlatans would do. And so I couldn't really tell people what I did at parties. People would laugh at me. They would walk away. They would shout. They would act like I killed their grandmother. And yet I had endless flow of business.
Wow.
I always supported myself. I was never in it for the money, though. I just did it because I did it. And I never seemed to be able to every time I tried to get another job, the phone would ring off the hook with people needing work. I was never allowed out. There's lots of things I like to do, not just astrology.
What do you think changed in order for, I guess that just happens when time passes, people get more progressive and accepting?
Sarah, the last 5 years, 10 years, I've seen an explosion of interest in your generation I have never seen. I had no idea. When I was doing this, I never wrote my books for money because there wasn't any money in the field. I didn't do this for money. I eked along. It was just all of a sudden it's going completely nuts. Maybe your group had something to do with this in past lives. Who knows? But all of a sudden it's a respectable career.
I love to tell people that I'm an astrologer.
I've seen it on TV. It's a #1 marketing tool now. I'm just absolutely astonished by this because I've kind of gone through my life, like this. I just said, what do you do, dear? Well, I'm a publisher. I'm an illustrator. I'm a writer, anything but that. But it would spread around what I did, and I always had clients calling.
Something that I think open-minded skeptics, which I like to put myself in that category, will acknowledge is that astrology can be useful. It can point out all sorts of things that maybe you've been ignoring in your life, or it offers the opportunity for a lot of self-reflection. I don't know if you've given any thought to the difference between astrology as quote unquote working, as in can it improve someone's life, versus astrology being like quote unquote true, meaning it can prove itself, and up to the scientific method. Have you thought about those two differently or in different ways?
You are good at asking questions. That's a good one. I spent all the people I grew up with were working class who had great skills. I always wanted astrology to be extremely useful. So in my astrology career, I endeavored to learn all the practical skills of astrology. So I find it extremely useful in many ways. I even wrote up a little list in my book, Medical Astrology for Health Practitioners. But it's useful in timing surgeries. It's so useful medically. This person should not be released from the hospital today. Or let's get a surgeon that's going to be lucky for you. Or why are you not being able to have a baby? Let's find I'm now the proud father of many. I've helped so many women get pregnant. I have so many astro babies. Then there's the medical, there's timing, there's career choices, helping with career choices. There's helping with psychological issues. Why is my child always depressed? Or what is behind this person's ADHD? And there's help with couples. Should you get married to this person? Okay, that looks good. Do you want a good marriage date? Let's get good soil for your beautiful little tree to grow. Harvesting and farming. Picking pets. I've helped people pick horses, pets, and adopted children.
Well, and I think also astrology is bigger than just helping people. It's like following mundane astrology, which is just, what's going on in society and things like that, right?
Yes. Oh, my goodness. Then there's mundane. So, financial, weather, earthquakes, politics, fire, the prediction of great world events. This has always been a province of mundane astrologers. Mm-hmm. And they've always come under fire in different cultures. I try to avoid doing anything with, politics. There's 7 branches of astrology at least. There's 6 distinct branches just of medical astrology alone. Just of medical astrology alone. We teach all 6 branches at my school. There's also, so we have 7 branches of astrology, each extremely useful to mankind or humankind. And this is something, most skeptics, I know Scott isn't in this league, but so many skeptics don't have any knowledge about astrology. So I'll say to them, I appreciate a skeptic. I, in a sense, am one. Go and study astrology for a year so you know what a chart is. Scott's bothered to do that. You know how this works. Then let's have a conversation, because so many of them don't even know that. Mm-hmm. And so if a skeptic studies astrology, I'm more than happy to let's have a talk. And because they have some valid concerns. There's an awful lot of goofy stuff in astrology, I admit. There is.
Yeah, the precision, just for me, I'm like, wait a minute. Why and how? And of course, Sarah's, the more you learn about astrology, the more there is to learn about astrology. And just, well, what if this is making this angle with this other planet? And from my perspective, I'm like, how in the world could that have a difference in someone's life? But you can still take more information from it. It can still give you insight and something new to think about, which to me, we're talking about, benefits even that someone who doesn't believe it's like true can still gather from it. It's focusing your attention on different areas of life.
Yes, and if skeptics could understand that an astrologer is not just an astrologer like this one over here, every single astrologer that they're thinking about may have a completely different practice, use different methods. They're talking about apples and oranges. Medical astrologers are, not psychological astrologers necessarily. An evolutionary astrologer is not an electional astrologer. These are actually different disciplines. I prefer my students to be good in all of them because that's how you were in the Renaissance. You could do it all. That takes many years.
Well, something we try to foster on this show is a nice dialogue between the skeptic and the astrology minded. And so I'm just curious, over all the years, if you think of like something that each side has to learn from the other, or how you can benefit from talking to each other.
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that, Scott. Very thoughtful question. So the skeptic, the astrologer needs to know that the skeptic may need a little more education, may not even know what they're being skeptical about. That's usually the case. You're very unusual. So the skeptic may not even know what they're being skeptical about. So first of all, there has to be an even playing field there. But if they do, they have every right to question you, because astrology is a belief system, just like a religion or just like science. Science is a belief system. Scientists think their methods work. Astrologers think but feel they know their methods work because they see them working all the time. The skeptic has never seen astrology work to their satisfaction. So if you have an open-minded skeptic, the idea would be to show the skeptic why you think this works and why you think this is valuable. The skeptic might come up with some really, really great reasons why it's all in your head. And the skeptic feels it's all, the astrologers are nuts. I'm aware of this. But why do they think that? Now, there's a lot of odd things in astrology. Like right now, astrologers are deciding what all these new little planets mean immediately based on their name. Just within minutes. Okay, Eris is a warrior. Eris means hot-headed women. I mean, this kind of stuff. Now, that is something a skeptic finds just absolutely, goofy. Do they have a right to feel that? I think that's very valid because they don't, there's no proof the planet means that. So there's things that the skeptic has a different kind of mind, and the astrologer needs to appreciate it. The astrologer's on the mystical, accepting, holistic mind frame, and the skeptic has a mind like a scalpel. Really asking some tough questions. Is this just your mind that's doing it? My teacher had me watch Judge Judy for a year and a half to develop a mind like a scalpel. And so it benefits the astrologer to gain the same kind of sharp mind that a skeptic has. And it benefits the skeptic to become more aware that there are things that they don't know, that there are larger holistic forces at work, that maybe the universe is all one big thinking mind, that there are things going on they can't fathom with the rational mind. They have to experience. So both sides can learn from each other. And I have both sides. I'm naturally extremely skeptical. I am very critical. I have to train myself out of it. But my father was highly clairvoyant. I also have this other side that is very holistic. I've learned to be like this. So I think both sides can learn a lot from each other. I hope that helps.
That. I think that's a great answer. And I guess I feel that way too. I don't know if Scott sees me that way, but I do feel skeptical because, I'll learn a new technique and then I'll be like, okay, well, let's see if that is consistent. And so I will look through a bunch of charts and see if that is present in those charts and not present in the other ones. And I try not to take things for granted, but I am definitely very optimistic and open-minded and get very excited about it.
Well, you're certainly courageous enough. Most people don't test themselves like you're doing. And this is remarkable, Sarah. You're a gal after my own heart.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
And our guest astrologers too that have come on the show each week, And it's tougher sometimes because they only have 1 or 2 shots at it because, they get to just come on 1 episode, maybe 2 episodes. But I think the astrologers are very brave. And you too, Judith, when you did that one test, just to be able to, like you said, at the time, you didn't feel like you had a lot on the line. So it's easier back then. And that is actually what Sarah said when we started this podcast, was just like, what? She didn't feel like she had a lot to lose. Why not? Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, now, if I lost, it would be all over town. But I do feel that if I could be tested in some of the ways that I've been working on, crafting these tests, I feel and I hope that I would pass at 80%. I maybe 100, but 80 would be decent. And I feel it can be done with eligible astrologers, with very finely crafted, very specific tests, with good, accurate data, enough time in the way they practice. They could sit and study the chart. They can put it in their own handwriting, and particularly if they could see the person in person and talk to them. Now you can't do that on virtual. It's impossible. I'm not expecting that, but if I could see parade people around, turn around, please, take off your coat, take off those sunglasses, let me hear you talk. Can I see your ear? I am pretty sure. I can't be positive because being skeptical, Scott, I don't know how much my mind is creating this, but I believe and I hope that I would get 80% being able to match pairs of people coming in, maybe do a set of 10. Or if I wasn't going to see the people, some of these tests I suggested, like we do, one I didn't suggest. This is one I think I could do. Get me some charts. They'd have to be accurate, signed on by a doctor, of people who suffered mania and hyperactivity, or just extreme hyperactivity, who are very lean, very skinny, and never had been fat. Maybe they're 40 years old. You have to have a lifetime. Versus phlegmatic, obese, highly depressed people who are not hyperactive and depressed and sleep a lot, probably with some edema, water bloating. Get me those 2 kinds of charts. I think they could be matched like this. Easy.
I love that.
If you or if any of our listeners want to test themselves, and you don't have to publish any results if anything doesn't go the way you want to, we encourage everyone to go back through the back catalog and revisit some of these wonderful guests that we've had. And even if you can't ask questions directly of the guest, I like to think that the astrologers and I cover a lot of territory to at least give you a good sense of their personality. And then you can look at the 2 charts and just have fun with it. It doesn't even have to be a test for you. It can be practice just to see. But it definitely is fun to meet these people and get to know them, and then use it for science.
Well, you've got me very interested again, Sarah and Scott. I'm just so busy right now, but boy, I would love to see some of these tests really done. And what you're doing is pretty groundbreaking at the Astrological Detective. It really is.
Well, I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Judith. We really appreciate you coming on and talking to us. This has been, I've learned so much from you today, and even before today, but I'm fascinated by that sun sign project. I think we might dabble with that.
Yeah, I still have it in the back drawer somewhere. And the little thing that, she almost won the award, but I can't give it to her because of some ridiculous logistics glitch, which there was not, by the way. But I still have that multitude sun sign thing I did. But yeah, be specific. You'll get genre plus subgenre. But if you do just genre, you're probably not going to get anything. Maybe a little. Yeah.
Well, we're willing to award you as an honorary astro-detective, so at least you have that.
Yes. Well, thank you. Well,
add it to the list, of the very long list of accolades.
Well, I hope that this will help future researchers, those who watch this program, because if anything I have to give is don't go that way, go this way.
I love that. That's great.
Well, it's good meeting you.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on, and you're always welcome back. Let us we'll have some new results for you next time. And you're also at conferences here and there, which Sarah saw. And
oh yes,
yeah.
Oh, we're putting on a conference. We're putting on November 12th through 15th. We're putting on the Herbalism and Medical Astrology Summit with 6 or 9 of the biggest names, superstars in herbalism and medical astrology. We just announced it today.
Oh, wow. And where is it going to be?
At the Academy for Astrological Medicine. And you can look at it at .com. And Melissa Beam she's my director, and she's handling all productions. And she's dealing with all of this. She's wonderful. I think you met her.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Awesome. Is it online or virtual, or do you go in person?
It'll be virtual.
Oh, okay.
We're going to have Seja Popham. We're going to have Cameron Allen, Adriana Ayales, Zoe Gong, I think is her name. We're having several international from China, South America. Everybody speaking on herbalism and medical astrology combined.
Cameron Allen has been a guest astrologer on our show.
Yeah. Good, very good. And Robert Weinstein's going to be on our show too. He's one of our speakers, and he was at NORWAC, and myself. So we just put this together, and I did a long series of herbalism and medical astrology conferences starting in 1992. First in the U.S., I believe, if not if anywhere, I don't know. But this is another one after a long hiatus, but produced by a different person under me. So over me. She's doing most of the work.
Well, I plan on enrolling in your academy. I really am so fascinated by the medical astrology. I myself have had a slew of medical problems and surgeries, so I feel like I'm a great person to learn medical astrology because I know a lot about health and healthcare and navigating that. And and I have almost all your books, and I will be ordering those 2 reports from you as well.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, they're I might, if you want the astro-seismology, let me know. I can get one out too. So
fantastic. Yeah.
And everybody out there. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's nice meeting you too, Scott. Nice meeting you, Sarah. I met you, Sarah, at NORWAC.
Yes.
And anybody listening out there, please comment and let us know if you have any testing ideas, because we would love to incorporate them, and keep tuned in, because we might start doing some new tests now that we've got some brand new ideas. Thanks to our guest, Judith Hill. Judith, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on Astro Detectives.
You're welcome, Scott, and hope you enjoy that list of research ideas I wrote for you both. So
we very much did.
We will. All right, Sarah, now that it's just us,
gosh.
Was that exciting?
That was a dream. Like, honestly, I am so thrilled that we had Judith Hill on our show. I mean, like, I'm trying not to fangirl out too much, but I honestly, like, I've taken so many of her courses and have so many of her books, and I really appreciate her teaching style. I'm definitely someone that needs to learn from someone like her, who is very, like, technical and practical and wants to apply astrology in a useful way. That's very important to me. I do like, the astrologers that can get really into the kind of airy-fairy spiritual stuff too, but like as on the side, kind of like I really need to learn it from someone who's very technical minded.
Mm-hmm. And I really liked her interest in, the specifics of the testing of it. Oh, well, if you can get 60%, then I'm like, yeah, I agree. That's some good data there. Let's try to replicate that, Definitely, I think got us interested in some additional testing that we can do. She was mentioning some of the sun sign stuff, which we'd kind of shied away from previously, but in the right context, that could be a lot of fun.
My ears definitely perked up when she was talking about that. And I was thinking, and when you kind of called back to when we had Lane on and he was talking about the different comedians. I don't know if there's a way we can kind of classify them. I feel like that would be really interesting because, you know, you and I are both interested in comedians so much. It'd be fun to kind of take a look at that.
I was thinking that can get real subjective really fast, which is why I was hoping that maybe a couple signs would pop up in the category of all comedians. But, you know, that's the task. That's the hard work, is finding out these subcategories. You know, like even with baseball players, I'm like, are pitchers one sign? Are there different types of pitchers? Because the more you break it down, the harder it is to get a good size sample group.
Yeah, I think like how we could look at the Longhorns. You know, we used to go to Longhorn football games together. That'd be that'd be our own little fantasy football test. Mm-hmm.
For sure. And well, we'll get started. We'll get back to work before the next case. And listeners, I hope that we contributed some more insight just in astrology testing from somebody who's participated in it for, you know, more than most, you know, and been successful. So we always love diving into the data, and I'm glad that she did too.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to start hand drawing some of these charts. Oh boy.
Oh, talk about homework, Sarah.
I know.
As if your preparation wasn't long enough. Now you're going to be hand drawing your charts.
Yeah. Oh, I'll let you know how that goes.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for listening and watching on YouTube. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Thank you everybody for listening. We will be back with another case next time. And please post any questions in the chat or in whatever platform you're watching this on, and we'll try to answer them, or suggestions for testing. We're always looking for great ways to put astrology to the test in fair and productive ways. And until next time, this interview is closed.
Okay.